Okay, so you want to own a chicken farm, an egg operation. Buy the land, build the coops, stock the flock, watch the egg checks roll in. That's the plan in your head. And unlike a lot of what we cover on this channel, it's a plan that actually works for some people. Here's the catch. A chicken farm is not a backyard hustle scaled up. It is a contract manufacturing operation for a company that isn't you, running on a biological production line that a single virus can shut down overnight. By the end of this, you'll know exactly what it takes to make an egg farm profitable, and whether you're the kind of owner who can pull it off. Let's start with what it actually costs to get in. Land and housing are the first real number. A modern layer house, ventilated and climate controlled for a flock of 5,000 birds, runs $150,000 to $400,000 depending on automation level. Add land, and a small commercial operation starts at $250,000 to $600,000 before a single hen has moved in. That's the number that scares off the hobbyists. It's also the number that filters out everyone who hasn't done the math, because everything after it is where the real business lives. First, the flock itself. Started pullets. Young hens ready to begin laying. Run $8 to $15 each. 5,000 birds is $40,000 to $75,000, and they won't produce a single marketable egg for another 6 to 8 weeks. Second, feed infrastructure. Automated feeders, watering systems, egg collection conveyors. Call it $50,000 to $120,000 depending on how much of the operation you automate versus run by hand. Third, biosecurity and permits. Fencing, footbaths, air filtration, and the state and federal permitting required to sell eggs commercially runs $20,000 to $50,000, and it is not optional. It is the line item that determines whether a disease outbreak on a neighboring farm becomes your problem too. And here's the first trap nobody budgets for: the working capital gap. Pullets take 6 to 8 weeks to mature into laying hens, and full production isn't reached for another several weeks after that. You're paying full feed costs for a flock generating zero revenue for nearly 3 months. That gap runs $30,000 to $60,000 in cash you need sitting in reserve, earning nothing, before a single egg is sold. Add it up, and a modest 5,000 bird starter operation costs $390,000 to $915,000 to get running. And we haven't sold a single dozen yet. So what did you actually buy? Not a farm in the way the postcard suggests. What you bought is closer to a contract manufacturing line for an industry where the buyer sets the price. The input cost moves independently of anything you control, and the product itself can be wiped out in a single biological event. Think of it less like farming and more like running a factory that makes a perishable, price-capped product using a raw material, feed grain, priced by a commodity market that has never heard of you and never will. That's not a farm. That's a manufacturing line with feathers, and the factory owner doesn't set the price at the door. Now let's follow the money that moves every single week, because this is where the real business hides: feed. A laying hen eats roughly a quarter-pound of feed a day, and at current corn and soybean meal prices, that's $12 to $18 per bird per year. Feed alone is typically 60 to 70% of total operating costs on a commercial layer operation, the single largest expense by a wide margin. Labor and equipment maintenance. Even a highly automated operation needs daily labor for egg collection, flock health checks, and equipment upkeep. $40,000 to $90,000 a year on a 5,000 bird operation, depending on automation level. Veterinary and flock health. Routine care runs $2,000 to $5,000 a year for a healthy flock, but a disease event can require the entire flock to be treated, tested, or in the worst case, depopulated. A cost category that doesn't scale gently. It scales in one catastrophic step. And here's the mechanism and version nobody expects. You are not the one setting your egg price. Roughly 90% of US eggs move through a small number of large processors and distributors who set the wholesale price based on national supply, not your production costs. You absorb feed price volatility. They set the number on the check. You are a price taker in an industry where almost everyone downstream of you is a price maker. That's the part nobody budgets for. So the annual operating cost lands somewhere between $18 and $28 per bird, for a production cycle that runs 12 to 18 months of peak laying before a flock needs to be replaced entirely. Run that forward on a 5,000 bird flock, and you're looking at $90,000 to $140,000 a year in operating costs before a single disease event. And fragility here is structural, not incidental. Highly pathogenic avian influenza has forced the depopulation of tens of millions of commercial layers in recent outbreak years, and when it hits a region, it doesn't just threaten the infected farm. It disrupts supply and price for every producer nearby for months. Just when the math starts to feel survivable, One confirmed case on your property turns a profitable flock into a mandatory, government-ordered total loss inside a single week. In February of 2022, a man named Wade Colton, running a 50,000 bird commercial layer operation outside Ames, Iowa, had done almost everything right. He built the operation over a decade, starting with 5,000 birds in 2011 and reinvesting profits into expansion. He carried proper biosecurity certification, followed state inspection protocols to the letter, and by 2020, industry trade press had profiled his farm as a model of modern layer operation management. The problem wasn't his management. The problem was a virus that doesn't check certifications. In February 2022, highly pathogenic avian influenza was confirmed in his flock, likely introduced through wild waterfowl migration patterns entirely outside his control. Under federal protocol, his entire 50,000 bird flock was depopulated within 72 hours. Government indemnity programs covered roughly 70% of the appraised bird value. But appraised value doesn't include lost future income, the 6-month mandatory downtime before restocking is permitted, or the ongoing costs of loans taken out for the original flock that no longer existed. Colton's restocking and facility recertification costs ran past $180,000, on top of 6 months with zero revenue and full facility overhead still due. He restocked at reduced capacity in late 2022, carrying nearly $250,000 in new debt to do it. The answer is not personal incompetence. The answer is structural. But here's the part nobody tells you. Egg farming does work, and there's a witness for that too. In 2017, a woman named Priya Kapoor started a 1,200-bird pasture-raised egg operation outside Asheville, North Carolina, with a fraction of the scale and none of the industrial infrastructure Colton eventually rebuilt. The difference showed up almost immediately. Instead of selling into the commodity wholesale market, Kapoor sold exclusively direct to consumer. Farmers, markets, a small on-farm store, and a weekly subscription box, bypassing the processor-distributor chain entirely. By 2020, 3 years in, she was selling pasture-raised eggs at $7 to $9 a dozen, compared to the roughly $1.50 to $2.50 a dozen wholesale commodity price Colton's operation had been exposed to. Her revenue per bird ran 4 to 5 times the commodity equivalent. Her net income by 2021, on a flock roughly 40 times smaller than Colton's pre-outbreak operation, ran $55,000 to $75,000 a year. Genuine, sustainable profit on a fraction of the capital and none of the concentrated disease exposure that comes with housing tens of thousands of birds under one roof. She wasn't immune to risk. A regional avian flu scare in 2022 forced her to move her flock to fully enclosed housing for several months, cutting into the pasture-raised premium she normally charged. But her smaller flock size and lower stocking density meant she never had a confirmed case, and her diversified customer relationships meant no single point of failure could end the business. So what's the single structural variable that separated Colton from Kapoor? It wasn't luck, and it wasn't work ethic. Both of them built and ran their operations with real competence. It was concentration risk. Colton's 50,000 birds under one roof represented a single point of catastrophic failure. One confirmed case meant total loss. By federal law, no exceptions. Kapoor's 1,200 birds, spread across pasture rather than concentrated in one industrial structure, represented a fundamentally lower risk exposure, even before accounting for her pricing model. The answer is not personal incompetence. The answer is how concentrated your risk is under a single roof. So what does profitability actually require? On the commodity path, the Colton path, before the outbreak. A layer operation typically needs 20,000 birds or more before fixed costs and automation investment are spread thin enough to generate real per-bird margin at wholesale prices. Below that scale, on commodity pricing alone, you are structurally farming to break, even not to profit. On the direct-to-consumer path, the Kapoor path, profitability is achievable at 500 to 2,000 birds, but requires a genuinely different skill set: farmers market sales, customer relationship management, and a willingness to spend time selling eggs, not just producing them. Years to break even, 3 to 5 years on either path, assuming no major disease event in that window. Typical net margin once established, 5 to 10% on the commodity path at scale, 25 to 40% on the direct-to-consumer path at a fraction of the flock size. That's a shipping container versus a farmer's market stall. Same product, completely different exposure to the people who set your price. Let's simulate it. Same land, same starting flock size. A mid-sized 2,500 bird pasture and direct-to-consumer operation. 2 different years. The good year. Feed runs $35,000. Labor and equipment maintenance, $45,000. Routine flock health, $3,000. no disease event. Total operating cost, roughly $83,000. At an average $7.50 a dozen sold direct. Gross revenue runs $175,000 to $210,000. Net profit for the year, $92,000 to $127,000. A genuinely meaningful income for an owner-operated business. Now, the bad year. Same fixed costs, feed, labor, routine health, climb to $95,000 as grain prices spike. A regional avian flu advisory forces temporary enclosed housing, cutting egg production by 20% for 2 months, and eliminating the pasture-raised price premium during that window. Total operating cost, $98,000. Revenue drops to $130,000 to $150,000 as the premium pricing is temporarily unavailable. Net profit, $32,000 to $52,000. A hard year, a real pay cut, but nowhere near the total loss a concentrated commercial operation risks with a single confirmed case. That is a used car-sized swing in income, in either direction, off the exact same flock. The difference between a great year and a rough one being manageable rather than catastrophic, and that gap is the entire argument for staying small enough to stay diversified. So can you own a chicken farm? Yes, with real, specific conditions. If you're entering the commodity path, you need capital well into 7 figures, a realistic path to 20,000 plus birds, and, critically, the balance sheet to survive a mandatory total loss depopulation event that federal law can trigger regardless of how well you run your operation. This is a capital-intensive, high-concentration risk business best suited to owners with institutional-scale financing and diversified holdings beyond the farm itself. If you're entering the direct-to-consumer path, you need far less capital to start. $80,000 to $150,000 is realistic for 500 to 1,500 birds. But you need real sales skills, a local market willing to pay a premium, and the discipline to keep flock size small enough that disease risk stays a setback rather than an extinction event. If your plan is to scale up fast and sell into the commodity market with no plan for what happens the day a single bird tests positive, the math is not on your side. It was never on Wade Colton's side either, and he did almost everything right. You didn't buy a chicken farm. You bought a bet on how much risk you're willing to keep under one roof. And the owners who last are the ones who kept that number small enough to survive being wrong once.